Okay, so I personally experienced a diagnosis of adrenal fatigue. And so my assumption when I experienced the diagnosis and I had all the symptoms of adrenal fatigue, my assumption was, gosh, there must be something wrong with my adrenal glands themselves. My adrenal glands have just completely gone kaputs and they can't make cortisol anymore. And I actually realized that that wasn't the case at all. My adrenal glands did not understand when to make adequate cortisol. And so they just completely downregulated their metabolic function because they were experiencing what we would call metabolic chaos. And what is metabolic chaos? It's circadian rhythm disruption. Remember, every organ in the body runs on a time. It has a time of a maximum metabolic activity and a time where it decreases. And this goes all the way back to the traditional Chinese medicine clock, right? And so we've somehow really gotten away from this idea that the organ systems need to understand time of day or time of night to optimize their function, including the secretion of certain hormones. And so when I began to actually understand light in conjunction with my environment, and how my light environment was garbage, I began to realize that my adrenal glands were simply not getting the correct message. So this is why, as a clinician, I don't care what someone comes to me with. It could be adrenal fatigue. It could be thyroid issues. It could be gut health issues. It could be metabolic issues, cardiovascular issues. So fibromyalgia, right? There's so many different diagnoses we have these days. I lay the foundation of light. And so I want to share my screen for a second and just show you one of the slides in the practitioner training on light in order to be able to understand specifically what I'm talking about in conjunction with adrenal fatigue. So let me share here. Okay. So what we have here is this idea that we have to have an input. So what you see here is a cross-section of a brain. Okay, you see the cross-section of the brain, and you'll see that there's an eyeball, which, remember, eyes are simply specialized brain tissue. And so the eye has a direct connection to the brain via something called the retinohypothalamic tract. And we have sensors in the backs of the eyes that are designed to work for us, not to necessarily in a non-visual way. So of course, one of the main reasons why we quote unquote see is so that we can experience our world. The glass in front of me, the monitor, the window, the desk, right? All of these things I can see because of my visual sensors, my visual pathways. But we have a lot of non-visual sensors for our light environment. Why? Well, it turns out that those non-visual receptors are ones that actually are helping to give us information about our environment, time of day, brightness. There's a lot of things that our non-visual receptors are trying to organize for us or tell us so that our body can organize all of its tasks around it. So picture this, right? When I was experiencing the worst of my adrenal fatigue, and I'm telling you, this is after I did all of my elimination diets. Remember, I have a master's degree in clinical nutrition. I have a certification in body work, all sorts of fitness certifications, breath work, you name it. I've really gone down the quote unquote alternative health rabbit hole for quite some time now. But none of that moved the needle for my fatigue. I was still experiencing exhaustion. I was still experiencing insomnia. And so, yes, ashwagandha helped a little bit. Yes, eliminating sources of inflammation in my diet helped my gut at least a little bit, but nothing moved the needle until I actually understood light. And so what happens here, right? Why do we talk about going outside at sunrise to help facilitate support with all of these different disease conditions, but specifically adrenal fatigue? Well, at sunrise, you can see that sunrise light. So what you see at the bottom there is what's called a spectral readout of all the blends of light that are coming to us at sunrise. And so this is actually just before sunrise. It's really dominant in the red. There is blue present, but the blue isn't intense enough for us to, for it to sense, for our sensors for blue light to pick it up at all. And so then at sunrise, we literally have the blue increase to the extent that it matches the red. And that rise in blue, that blue becomes intense enough that the sensors in the back of the eyes, the non-visual sensors called melanopsin receptors, they start to fire off. And that signals to them that it's the start of the day. And guess what we need to have surge at the start of the day? We need cortisol to surge. That cortisol surging into the blood is a hormonal marker to the rest of my organ systems that the day has started, right? We have to start to prepare to anticipate food. We sometimes have a little surge, what's called a cortisol awakening response, with an bit of elevated blood glucose in anticipation for now becoming active at the start of my day. And so all of this requires circadian signaling via light. And so what I wasn't getting was any outdoor circadian signaling in terms of my light environment. And what I was getting too much of was this crazy artificial amount of blue. So my adrenal glands, that pathway basically just got chaotic. And so it severed, it downregulated. It said, my adrenal gland said, it can't possibly be sunrise or in the middle of the afternoon, this bright blue all the time. And so that it started to downregulate its adrenal output. And so you can see here that the light entering the eyes communicates to the clock in my brain, the SCN, suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this literally communicates to another major gland in my brain called my pituitary gland. So as clinicians, you've probably heard about the HPA axis in regards to adrenal fatigue, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. There's also the HPT, hypothalamic pituitary thyroid, the HPG, hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. We have the HPP, which is the hypothalamic pituitary pancreatic axis. We have axes to the liver, axes to other aspects of the gut. I mean, all of this is a beautiful coordinated signaling pathway so that we can communicate things back and forth from the organ to the brain, from the brain to the organ, from our environment into the brain to the organ systems to just coordinate all of our tasks. And so that suprachiasmatic nucleus is in the hypothalamus. That's the H in the HPA. So the main input that helps to the hypothalamus to organize the activity levels of all of these different organs is the light that's entering our eyes. So that's why we're designed to get that blue light stimulus at sunrise, and it tells our hypothalamus and our pituitary gland to start to make cortisol. So I'm going to show that on the other slide. So I have another slide right after this that I want to show you. So where is cortisol in all of this, right? Well, cortisol is part of the steroid hormone cascade, right? All of the sex hormones or the steroid hormones are on this page right here. And what I hope you can see is that they all start off, yes, they start off as cholesterol, right? And they also start off with the mitochondria converting that cholesterol to pregnenolone. This pathway, if we're not stimulating this pathway right here on a regular basis, we are going to be predisposed to adrenal fatigue and hormone dysregulation. I had flatlined cortisol, I had flatlined hormones, my libido was tanked, my energy was tanked, right? I mean, all of this has to do with the fact that I wasn't stimulating this pathway correctly. And so cortisol becomes pregnenolone. Maybe you've heard that pregnenolone called our master steroid hormone, because then what the body gets to decide in that morning window of time, the body says, how much cortisol does Carrie need in order to have adequate energy and perhaps adequate blood glucose to start the day? And then based on Carrie's stress level or threats or the potential for food scarcity, how can we divvy up the rest of that pregnenolone into the hormones of fertility? So then it says, okay, yes, we're going to put some into cortisol, but then we're going to be able to optimize her fertility with adequate amounts of progesterone, DHEA, the various estrogens, testosterone, right? So all of that gets divvied up in this morning window of time. I was missing sunrise all the time. And in fact, I would go straight to a gym I owned a fitness facility. I would go straight there at 5 o'clock in the morning, flip on tons of fluorescent and LED lights, and my body just didn't know what to do with it. And I literally did that for over a decade. And so my body, one of the things about circadian rhythm signaling is, yes, our body is looking to adapt and react in real time to our lighting environment. But as we actually start to establish a circadian rhythm, we actually have what's called circadian predictability. So the body doesn't have to always be in react mode. It instead knows that based on the light signaling we've been coaching in and day out, so light and darkness, so once we start to sync that circadian rhythm, we start to have predictability. which then means we don't have to be perfect, right? If I skipped a sunrise here and there, it wasn't the end of the world once I established this circadian predictability. At first, though, I absolutely had to be more diligent with my light environment, especially blocking artificial light at night, which I talk a ton about in a lot of my courses. And so I hope you can see, as soon as I started getting this light signaling and stimulating this pathway again, it only took 3 days for me to begin to notice that surge of energy associated with cortisol in the morning, to start to have regular menstrual cycles again, to start to have appropriate signals of libido, right? Appropriate changes in vaginal, vaginal mucus, egg white mucus during ovulation, right? Things that signaled to me that my body was beginning to optimize fertility as well. And that had been missing when my body didn't understand what was going on. It was in this existential threat all the time. And so it just shut down. It went into chaos and conservation mode. Again, I had maybe 15 pounds extra body weight than I do right now, that my body, I didn't try to lose any weight. My body just naturally said, oh, Carrie's not in a period of threat and scarcity. We don't need to hold this weight on her body because it's not needed to maintain her muscles, her activity, her frame. I mean, it's just not needed. And so that's why I address light, because literally addressing my light environment improved my fatigue, it completely, eliminated my fatigue, eliminated my insomnia, rebalanced all of my hormones to optimize fertility, and then also allowed me to have a healthy metabolic function so that my body naturally maintained muscle mass, but dropped the added body weight that it didn't need. So clinicians, I hope you're hearing this, right? That light, regardless of what we're dealing with, has to be the foundation that we lay, but especially in conjunction with adrenal fatigue. I do talk about a couple of other things in my adrenal fatigue courses because sometimes we need additional supports. I know I did for digestion for a little while there as my body was starting to get back into the circadian rhythmicity. I also used appropriate cold exposures on the face in order to kind of stimulate a part of my brain that had really downregulated its communication to the rest of my body, called the paraventricular nucleus. And so there's things that, we can do as clinicians in addition to this that can support adrenal fatigue, but this has to be the foundation.